We'll call the meeting to order. First thing on the agenda, do we have any bill introductions? Representative Arnberger.
It's not antique license plates, but it is antique bill of sale stuff. That's over my head. So I'm introducing that for my constituent.
Are there any questions? Representative Ballard.
Do you know what this bill does?
I let my constituent and the revisor work everything out, and so I'm introducing on his behalf.
That's good. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here today. How did you vote on the antique tag bill last year?
I don't remember.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, Mr. Chair, we apologize. We were just giving her a hard time.
Is there objection? That objection is introduced. Thank you. Are there other bill introductions? Yes, Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'd like to introduce 22 RS 2361. And this essentially takes an existing statute around handicap parking and adds clarifying language for which veterans qualify for a handicap placard.
Are there questions? They're not going to pick on you.
I get off easy.
Are there objections? Without objection, it's introduced. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Are there other bill introductions?
Division of Vehicles, they made a change in process that the salvage yards have to follow now. Yes, sir.
But there's no statute.
It depends who you talk to. The agency does say that in statute, a title is required. However, this is just my opinion, right? There's been a lot of gray area in here. Before 2018, the title was not required. So the hope is that the possessory lien affidavit can continue to be used, and we can just ignore the title requirement. But if the state is going to now change and say, no, you need a title, then the possessory lien affidavit may not be sufficient.
Well, I understand what you're saying. I'm just trying to figure out what was the rationale for the change if prior to 2018 they didn't require, and then 2018, either through statute or some regulatory thing in Department of Revenue, I'm just trying to figure out how that occurred and what was the rationale for it to happen.
I think you'll have a much better answer down the road here a little bit, but I think it's just things getting more strict and also tightening up some loose ends as far as having a better record for end of life on the VINs, just so there's not so many out there that are mysteriously disappearing.
Okay. So is it like a paperwork checkoff thing that has to be done, or does like the KHP have any fingers in that, in doing that?
Once again, I think the details are better handled by the professionals who deal with this every day. I think the Kansas Highway Patrol gets involved when there is a title and they have to do an inspection at one step of the process or the other, whether it's the tow yard or the salvage yard. And that gets interesting when a tow or salvage yard has a vehicle on their lot that they bought with a possessory lien affidavit, and Highway Patrol comes out, they do a run on the vehicle VIN and realize, hey, this thing's stolen.
Exactly.
That's happened.
I know it's happened. Okay, all right. Thank you for your explanation. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I may need to ask the people that know the details, but from your testimony, it sounds like Department of Revenue requires a title currently. And this bill says that you have to have a title and you have to give certain notification. What stops us from doing that now? I mean, what in statute stops us from following this process already?
Nothing stops that process from happening already, except that there is a process currently which allows an easier, in my opinion, an easier path for a tow yard to follow to gain possession of a vehicle and sell it at public auction. So currently, a tow yard or a public agency can get a possessory lien affidavit and sell a vehicle at public auction. And it is up to that tow yard or public agency to do all the notifications. I don't know if I'm saying this properly, but it's almost like an on your honor system, which is great. But if maybe they don't follow all the notifications or they accidentally forget one, then the burden falls onto the purchaser, which is often the salvage yards. Now they have to figure out what to do because they bought a vehicle that they need to get title for, and the notifications weren't done properly. So now they have to go back to the tow yard, figure out, do you have to buy my vehicle back and then do the notifications? Now we're out of the time frame, so now we got to start the process all over again, do all the publications in the newspapers. And oh, by the way, I run a business, I'm already parting out this vehicle that I bought.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand then is what we're trying to do is someone earlier in the process can currently get an intercessory lien. And instead of allowing them to do that, we're making them go ahead and get the clear title before they sell it at the auction. Someone earlier in the process has to do the title rather than the last guy that has it.
Yeah, we're just asking that tow yard or public agency essentially has to prove they own the vehicle in order to sell it. That would be my interpretation.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just, first of all, thank you for coming and explaining this because it makes a lot more sense now that you've explained kind of the rationale for it. But I just wanted to ask why this approach and not alleviating the requirement to have a title to crush the car?
That would, Representative, that would be the preferred route, but the state now requires a title, and I think that's part of the Invitas system. And I guess into some details, we're not an Invitas state. I don't exactly even know what that means, but that's what I've been told. However, we use the system, and in order to use the system requires a title. So.
Further questions? Representative Topliker.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I'm thinking about this right, Representative Alarcon. But what happens with the cars that have already been sold and are already being parted out when this bill becomes law? I mean, does this go retroactive into effect, or does this like say, okay, on this date this becomes law and everything after that, or any cars sold after that, then they have to fall under this new these new requirements for the title, or how's that work?
Okay, I'll answer it in a two-part answer. As far as the mechanics of end-of-lifing a vehicle, it doesn't really change a whole lot. A title would still be required just as it's required now. As far as the vehicles that are currently bought and sold, the bill does nothing retroactively. The bill just simply changes going forward that a tow yard or a public agency that has a towed or abandoned vehicle would simply need to get the title before they sell it. And the main difference is that, and I'll be corrected, I'm sure if I'm wrong on this, but possessory lien affidavit, it's kind of an on your honor system. A title, there's a check in there, right? The Department of Revenue Vehicle Division double checks the paperwork and makes sure that all the notifications were done properly. That's all the big difference is. It's just because they're requiring a title, possessory liens affidavit's no longer sufficient, then not be able to be used.
Further questions? Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So far, it seems logical to me, but could it also be, if you have to produce ownership of it, that you verify this is not a car that was stolen?
May I ask you to repeat
Because
the
it's
question?
on the lot doesn't mean, like, how did it get to the lot?
Oh, sure.
You know, along those lines. So therefore, if you're going to take ownership of it, this would be one way to make sure that this car is not misplaced or stolen or something else. That's not mentioned, I don't think, in the bill, but I'm wondering, did the person say anything about make sure that you are the rightful owner of this?
Absolutely, and I think you're going to hear some good stories about this from the self-charge owners, because they're the ones that buy these vehicles, and then when they go to get title, they get to sometimes get some prizes, some surprises on
the question,
yeah.
because the person might say, this is a great deal, it's a nice buy, I want this and everything else, and then this could be, you know, down the road, and all of a sudden it's like, wait a minute, I don't own this car now. I thought I owned it. You know, that made sense for me. Okay, you answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Further questions? Representative Delperdang.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess for the reviser, first question is there a difference between a vehicle title and a vehicle salvage title? Are we trying to get a salvage title for these or a true vehicle title?
There is a difference in the titles. I don't think, the bill does not specify exactly which title it's referring to.
Would we, I hate to say assume, but would we assume we're going after a salvage title on the vehicles if we're just going to crush them, so to speak?
It's, it's whatever the person would apply for.
And then the other question I had is, I know we had 2018 brought up, but last year, didn't we have a substantially similar bill on this? And we had several highway patrol people come in and actually testify on it.
There were a couple of different bills that went into effect. It was Senate Bill 36, I think, that they were all compiled into. That was more dealing with the salvage vehicle title and notifications. Some dealt specifically with these statutes in Senate Bill 36, as far as kind of when a public auction can be held and sort of when they can cross state lines and stuff like that. But this is a somewhat different issue.
This is different subject, so to speak.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman, may I offer a little bit on that point as well? So Representative Delperdang, I don't think there's a whole lot of difference between a salvage title or a title. I think it costs the same to get them, but it would be up to the tow yard to evaluate the vehicle that they towed and the condition that it's in. They may not want to get a salvage title. They may want to get a regular title. If it has a high resale value, they would probably just want to get a regular title. But if it's been in an accident, they may want to get a salvage title. But at the end of the day, I think it's the same process, same costs.
Any further questions? See none, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Next proponent I have listed is Mr. Steve Denton, Denton Auto Salvage. Welcome to the committee. As you can tell, there's probably going to be lots of questions.
A little bit of a prelude to what you're saying. Currently, the way I understand it for sure is that the tow lots are supposed to have all that paperwork done. When they hand it to us, there's supposed to be a packet. They're supposed to have the possessory lien. Highway Patrol is supposed to have already inspected it if it needed an inspection. All that's supposed to be done, and we just take it to the county or to the state and get a title. Probably less than half the time that's actually the case, though. So we end up running back and forth 2 or 3 times and doing, and depending on what the problem is, sometimes it's corrected fairly easily. Sometimes it sits for 6 months because we're trying to get a lien release from a trust company, or it was a stolen vehicle. I think people are going to talk about some vehicle they had that didn't realize it, tow lot had it sitting there for 3 months, and it was a stolen vehicle, and it was under investigation. They'd already paid for the car and everything else and had costs involved with it, and then had to try to figure out how to get the title for it. 3 particular instances with me that kind of really point to what happened. And this is about 2018 is when it started having problems. We'd sent some titles into the state. It was right about when Invis was happening. And they sent us a letter back saying, I think like 10 titles weren't there, that we had sent a bill of sale with the affidavit paperwork in. And they said they could no longer accept that. So we asked what they needed. They told us all that stuff. And about 3 weeks later, they had a lady come out and do a audit of all of our titles and everything that we did. And basically said the same thing, that we were subject to fine for every vehicle they find that we didn't have a title for. So we started getting a lot more strict on how we try. We used to buy a lot more cars from tow lots, and my business has kind of cut down on that some, just because it's so much work to do. When we've got costs involved in the car already, and you think everything's right, so you're you're trying to get inventory as quick as you can and get it processed and making money off the vehicle. And then you find out 3-4 months later that there's problems and you can't get title because this Highway Patrol will only come out to my facility once I have 5 cars to inspect. So they won't come out Monday morning after I buy the car and inspect it. So I have no way of knowing for sometimes a couple months that there was a problem. The one time we turned in, I think it was 17 titles, and the county said that we were 10 of them that they couldn't get us titles for, that there was different problems with. And most of them had to do with that they didn't have highway patrol inspection done. So we called the highway patrol and had them come out. And usually there's one officer comes out, and different ones, different times, but it's usually just one officer. And this particular time, 3 officers come in my front door. The officer, his lieutenant, and his captain. They wanted to know if I was dealing in stolen vehicles. And I mean, I basically got treated like a criminal, and it really, really disturbed me. We tried to do everything by the book as much as possible. If I buy a vehicle off the street, I get a title. I don't buy it from an individual unless they have a title. But from tow lots, that's not the case. They don't usually have a title. They usually just have the paperwork that they give you. So after the highway patrol was there for about 3.5 hours with all 3 of their officers doing VIN checks and then inspecting 10 or 15 other vehicles at my facility to make sure nothing else was stolen, they finally determined that this was a waste of time. And they've agreed with what you have said here, that it's kind of silly that they have to go through all this work to do that stuff. I don't think they would, if they were here testifying, I don't think they would be in support of having to do all the stuff that they have to do too, when it's just getting crushed. Now, if it's going back on the highway, you asked if it needed to be a highway title or a salvage title. To me personally, it doesn't matter that much. I don't do a whole lot of rebuilders. I know other building yards do. But that would be kind of this highway patrol's determination. If the vehicle is wrecked, it'd probably be a salvage title. But there's sometimes a vehicle, like there was a 2012 Camry here at an auction here just a few months ago. No damage at all. It was just abandoned. And I don't know if, well, I didn't buy it, but I don't know if it was a lien problem or what it was, but it sold for $12,000. And so I'm sure that person wanted a clean title on it. So I don't know what that answer is, if it has to be salvage title or not. To me personally, it wouldn't matter either way as long as I get a title. Another instance was we bought a 2006 Commander and took it to get the title and found out that they never got a lien release on it. And we spent 3 months back and forth with the county and driving back up to the tow lot to get paperwork done and stuff on it. And I mean, a lot of extra expenses that go into back and forth and time involved with chasing it down. When if they had all the paperwork there done correctly the first time, and all they had to do is get a title too, it'd be much simpler for them just to go ahead and get the title and then charge me the $25 for the title fee. So they're not out any money. We're not trying to put an undue burden on the tow lots. We just want it to be, when it hands it over to us, everything's done correctly so we can proceed with our business normally without any undue burden. On that particular car, I can't remember if it was the lien company had said that was, no, that was a different, that was the third vehicle. That one, it just took a couple months to get to. The third one was, I got a phone call. We bought a 17 Ford Fusion from tow lot. Everything was done correctly. Went to turn paperwork in. It did not have a highway inspection title, so we're waiting on the highway inspection to come from the highway patrol. And about 2 months after I got it, I got a phone call from a guy. His name was Zach from Title and Trust in Santa Monica, California. He'd seen on the internet that I had a 2017 that he owned the VIN title work on, and wanted to know how I was selling parts on a vehicle that they owned the title on. And we'd had the vehicle for 2 or 3 months. I'd already had the thing basically halfway disassembled. And he wanted to know what I was doing and told me I couldn't sell any more parts off of it. And I basically told him he needed to contact the tow lot company because I had all the paperwork that I'd bought it legally and that there's nothing I could do for him. And so I didn't know at that point, what am I supposed to do? Am I in the wrong, or is he in the wrong, or is the tow lot in the wrong? I don't know what that true answer is, but I didn't do anything intentionally illegal for dang sure, and was trying to follow the laws that the Kansas Department of Revenue had told us they had to do. Because the Kansas Department of Revenue strictly says that they will not accept just a bill of sale and an affidavit anymore, that it has to be the title. We've had 2 or 3 meetings with them. We've had several phone calls with them. They will not change their stance on that issue. It has to be a title for them to crush the vehicle, to accept it. And so that's why we're trying to get this passed. To me, it was much easier in the past, as long as we had a bill of sale and it came from a reputable, or any business tow lot, not just someone off the street. I could understand not wanting to accept a bill of sale from just an individual off the street and accepting that as a legal way of buying a vehicle. But if it's a tow lot who publicly listed it in the paper and did all the paperwork and everything, to me, a bill of sale would be fine, but I don't think they're going to accept that. Questions?
Other questions for Mr. Denton? Representative Toplicker.
So do the tow companies, do they actually run the VIN numbers to see, is there like a national stolen car thing that you can click into to see if a VIN number comes up before they try to sell a vehicle?
I can't tell you what they do to do it, but I know they're supposed to check it. Now, how they do that, I don't know if they just publish it or if there is a website or something that they have to go through a portal to publish that VIN number and see if anybody claims it or what. I don't know what that answer is for sure.
To me, it seems like that you could stop a lot of this, confusion by checking in and seeing if there was a stolen car at that point or at some other earlier point.
My instance is I never actually had a stolen vehicle that I had possessed. It was always that they had a lien release on or didn't give a lien release. It was a company that the person wrecked the vehicle and just abandoned it when they still owed $15,000 on the vehicle. So the bank or the trust company still owned the vehicle technically, and just wanted to know why.
Then Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, there is a agency, well, it's called NCIC. And then you talk to any trooper, any city police officer, sheriff, when they stop a car, they can run, usually just run it by the tag, but they can also run the VIN on the car, and that'll come back to the last registered owner of that vehicle. It'll also tell them usually if it's stolen, if it's been placed in NCIC as a stolen vehicle. If it's like just stolen, then they're probably going to talk to the gentleman or the lady that's driving the car. But you should be able to contact the local PD and just have them come out if they're not busy, and they'll just run the VIN number, and you can get a lot of information off that way if there's no tag. So, but that's the place to go. And what troubles me when I'm here is sound like it's kind of like a haphazard relationship between yourself and the tow company that gets this vehicle. Is that what I'm hearing?
No, I don't think so. I think we have pretty good relationships, and I think most of them try to do some of the stuff right, but they don't always have it right. And then when there's a problem, we're stuck with the problem.
What I'm saying is what I'm envisioning is a checklist that you should have and he should have, and they should check that off before they deliver or you pick up that vehicle from them. And you should compare your paperwork and say, okay, I checked this off, check this, and boom, then you're done because your paperwork agrees with each other. At that point, I would think that the problem is moot.
If they had called me and just wanted me to bid on a car, that could probably be done. There's 50, 60 cars at an auction. You show up at 9 o'clock, you start bidding on all these cars, and you have to pay for the car before you leave that day. Whether you pick the vehicle up or not, you have to pay for it at that time. Or otherwise, they won't let you back in the sale ever again. So I'm paying for the vehicle without any paperwork before I pay for it. So I understand what you're saying, and it would make sense if you could, but when you deal with an auction and time constraints in a 2-hour period, they're not going to be able to check every VIN for every person there. Might be 20 other people that bought different vehicles there. You have to check all those VINs. That'd put a lot of pressure on the tow lot company to do that.
When the tow companies pick up a vehicle off the highway or it's abandoned on even in a back road somewhere, don't they have to contact the local law enforcement agency saying that we're picking up this vehicle at such and such address or location?
They're supposed to have on their paperwork signed either by the highway patrol or the local police, or at least listed where they picked it up. We've had a couple that we got rejected because the tow lot never said where they picked the vehicle up at. One was on campus, and another one was at the mall. It was just abandoned, but they didn't have the paperwork filled out right. Say, we're really not asking the tow lots to do any more of the legwork than what they're already doing, because they're supposed to be doing all of it anyway, other than getting the actual title saying, here you go.
Okay. All right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Ballard.
And thank you, Mr. Chairman. He asked part of my question because I wondered if you bought your cars in bulk. Like I have a friend who does that. But from what I can see here that you're asking is that you want to receive the title prior to it being sold. You just want to know that who has that vehicle. If they're selling it, they need to verify that they actually own it. I think that's what they're asking. Now, that seems logical to me because if I was buying something, I want to know, do you really own this? Just because you have it doesn't say to me that you own it and that you can get rid of it or you don't have a lien on it. And so it just seems to me, it's like you're trying to you can answer all of these questions, but if you can provide that title for me, then it saves you a lot of heartache. Or if someone coming out wanting to know, how did you get this vehicle? And that's what I hear. So, I mean, it just seems logical to me. If you buy something, you should be able to have the title and verify that the person who's selling it to you owns it and has the right to sell it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Further questions? Representative Francis.
So how big is this problem? How many of these cars a year do you have this problem on? And what percentage of your total purchases at these sales does that reflect?
I personally have limited it down some because I had so much problem with it. It just wasn't worth the headaches to me, which actually raises my cost of cars because when I buy them we buy most of our cars at the insurance auctions, Kansas City, Wichita, St. Louis, and then I have tow fees and everything else, a lot of other fees involved with it. So it's a lot easier to go to the tow lots and buy them as far as cost-wise because they usually are cheaper and you don't have all the extra fees involved, but it's just too much work for me. So I'll look at the list. If there's 10 or 15 cars that look like something I really am strongly interested, then I'll go bid it. But I used to go to all the tow lot auctions. I don't hardly go to
So
5 a year now. And I maybe buy, I think last couple of years we bought like 45 or 50 cars. It's about 5 to 10% of my cars probably. It used to be probably 25%.
And of those 45 to 50, how many did you have this problem with?
Roughly half.
And then, so what happens? Did you ever get to the point where you couldn't get a clear title on it?
I think there was one vehicle that we never did actually get a title on. It's still sitting at our place. I think it's an 05 Expedition.
So the reason you want to be able to buy these is because currently they're cheaper than what you buy at other places. But you can always eventually get the title one way or the other.
Yeah, it's actually a benefit both the tow lots and us for us to buy them because we pay more money than the person off the street will pay for the car 90% of the time. It actually makes them money by having us there.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Vice Chair Depledang.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. If I can expound on a previous question over here, but you mentioned auction lots or auction places. How is an auction facility or a dealer or anything like that, how are they selling these vehicles without title, without proof of ownership?
It's the tow lots are the only ones that do. The insurance auto auctions provide you a title with every vehicle they sell.
I thought you had mentioned you go to auctions and you occasionally get them without title.
Tow lot auctions, I occasionally get them without title. If I buy them from the insurance auctions, the insurance companies provide the titles to those businesses. And I buy, I don't know, 1,200 a year from total, so probably 1,000 roughly from the insurance auctions, and every one of those has a title.
Because I understand where you're coming from, especially when you get into the volumes you're getting into. But I'm still thinking whoever sells that to you should have a title to prove that it is theirs to sell it to you. And at that point, you should be free and clear then.
Yep. And like I said, the current law, I think, requires them to do every step of that except for actually producing the title. So we're not trying to ask them to do a whole lot of extra work than they should already be doing.
Okay.
If they're doing it the right way. I don't know if they all are or not. But it also helps with the rest of our industry. There's a lot of smaller salvage yards that aren't on computer systems that just do hand tickets or, card system and stuff that I don't know how they report all their cars to the state when they crash. I don't know if they do or not. I have no idea. But if they actually had the title in their name, they'd have to report it.
Representative Weigel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for the third time. Is there any way that we can contact somebody over at the Revenue DMV? Because it seems like they are the ones that would probably generate the paperwork for whatever needs to be done. Whether it's KHP or the Sheriff's Department that looks at the car, they're just following the paperwork that's provided to them. So I think what you need to do is go to Department of Revenue and Department of Motor Vehicles and find out exactly what they're requiring. We can narrow it down quite a bit that way, if that's possible.
I believe Leanne Phillips is on with the Department of Revenue is on the online. If she could answer some of these questions, that would be good. Leanne?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Yes, I can. Well, so to answer some of the questions, what this bill is designed to do is to require the selling tow company or storage company to get the title prior to the sale. What the process currently is a transfer of ownership through a legal process. So that possessory lien, once they tow that vehicle, they have a first and prior lien over any other lender. Then they do have, we have a form, it's online, there's a checklist, very specific about what's required to sell the vehicles or transfer ownership from the tow or storage lot. That what they're trying to do is recoup their fees from the tow or storage. And they do so by selling the vehicle, recoup their fees. But they do so based off of that affidavit. And as Mr. Denton testified, a lot of times the paperwork is insufficient then for the buyer to obtain a title. Most of these titles are clear titles, they're not salvage. If there is an issue with the vehicle being a salvage, typically we're notified by the insurance company of the salvage status, and we would take care of that. Some other information that might be helpful to the committee is that we are on Nvitas now. We went live with that in August of 2021. So that does tell us, it does an NCIC check. It tells us whether the vehicles are stolen. The tow companies are required to run a verification to find out the current owner or lien holder. If it's been titled in Kansas, they're required to send notification. There is a whole checklist of documents that they're required to produce. What this bill would do would be to just make them get the title prior to holding the sale. So it's a little bit of a different, it flips the onus from the purchaser to the seller. So, and then the questions that have been asked about crushing a vehicle. It was in 2018 that I had taken this post in 2017, realized that many salvage yards were sending in the possessory lien affidavits to end of life a vehicle. We believe we have statutory authority that requires them to send a title. You can't pass ownership on a vehicle or end of life a vehicle without turning in a title. So that's why that changed in 2018. I don't, in my opinion, I think it was just previous management that just didn't realize that was happening, or for whatever reason, the division had gotten lax. And so we went back to requiring that. We don't have a way to cancel that vehicle or show it as crushed or report it to Nvitas as crushed if they don't turn in the title to us. So that's why that came back up in 2018, as we believe we have statutory authority to require the title. If there's any other questions, I'm happy to answer.
Thank you, Leanne. Thank you, Leanne. Representative Francis has a question for you, I believe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the way you see this working, most of these tow companies would go ahead and still get this intercessory or possessory lien affidavit because they're hoping they're going to recoup their costs from the current owner or the current lien holder. Would that be correct? We're going to get that. Then if they can't get paid through that process, then they'll apply for the title at a later date so that they can sell it at the auction.
Correct. As Mr. Denton alluded to, many of the tow companies do this very well. There is a timeline. It requires them within so many days to run the verification to check ownership, and then within so many days to run a publication if that's required. Sometimes they get off the timeline, and that creates some issues. But if when they tow the vehicle, it's up to them to follow all those requirements to meet the criteria for a title. So the majority of the time, they're going to follow these requirements, and it's just going to require the tow company to get that title prior to sell, rather than them passing off a packet of papers that the buyer is hopeful that all the requirements have been met. And so I hope I've answered your question, but yeah, they should be able to still use this affidavit to obtain a title, as long as they've followed the process and the timeline.
Dave Howe.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Denton, for your testimony today and bringing this. When you go to a tow auction, are you required to buy any vehicle with cash?
I have never had to pay cash for them, no. I don't know if they require individuals to or not. I don't know for sure. I've always written a check to them.
Okay, but in order to get the paperwork, you have to actually hand over you have to make the transaction first, or can you verify the paperwork before you make the transaction?
I guess I've never asked them to do that. They always want payment at the end of the auction before you leave, and definitely before you can load any vehicles up. We usually have our truck there to load trucks, so we're trying to pay and get going. It's usually on a Saturday morning, so we're trying to get done and gone as quick as possible. But I don't know if they have anybody that does that on the spot or not.
Okay, so there's a general assumption that they have gone through all the steps that they're required to when they bring it to an auction. And so you're kind of just trusting that they've done their due diligence to do that, to ensure. Okay.
I don't want to, reluctant even to say this, but just to kind of prove the point here, I know another person owns another salvage yard that had contacted me, wanted me to know if he deals mainly in older cars, and he had about 40 vehicles he'd bought from a tow lot somewhere in central Kansas. I couldn't tell you the name of the tow lot, I don't know. But he wanted to know if I'd buy them from him. He said, they're really good parts and all that stuff, and I know you can do better than I can on them. I got them really cheap if you'll make me a deal. And I told him I have to have the titles for them. And he said, all I have is a bill of sale. I said, do you have all the paperwork for it? He said, no. That particular tow lot didn't do anything. He just gave him a bill of sale. And wasn't an auction though. He bought 40 vehicles from that lot. He basically bought the whole lot, which I think's borderline illegal probably, and I didn't want to touch anything to do with it, so I just stayed out of it. But that's the kind of stuff that goes on. If you don't have something where they have to have the title, more that's going to continue to go on.
Okay, thank you very much for clarifying that. Appreciate it.
Any further questions? Representative Cywert.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, and I appreciate all the work you have to do, because nobody that's never had a vehicle stolen doesn't know how hard it is to try to find it. And then you have to work real hard to make sure that the ones you buy are legal. So I agree with what you're trying to do here. I don't think it should be able to sell them unless they have the title in hand, just like anybody else. That way you can run your business the way you should. Because I've had several vehicles stolen and they just disappear out of sight. And they were not wrecked, so I don't know what happened to them. Thank you, sir.
Any further questions or comments? See none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Does anyone else wish to speak as a proponent? Yes, please identify yourself.
I'm Heather Clam. I'm with A&A Auto and Truck Parts. We're here in Topeka. My dad, Kurt, and my mom, Jane, own A&A Auto and Truck Parts, and I run their office. And my last name's Klamm. I submitted a testimonial. We do the same business that Steve Denton does. We buy more vehicles on possessory lien affidavits than he currently does. I tried to find an average, and we're anywhere from 250 to 450 vehicles a year on possessory lien. And since 2018, that's caused quite a burden. When I came and started working in the office, we were able to submit the possessory liens in order to do the end of life. But I do agree that we do need a change in the process. The possessory lien is necessary, in my opinion, because it requires the tow company to notify the registered owner, notify any lien holders. That should be done in order to move on in the process. But when that doesn't happen and the vehicle gets sold to us, then we now have a vehicle, in my opinion, that's been illegally sold. And so there were several examples that we've run across over the last several years. We bought a 2012 Kia Rio, and that was from AAA. I don't know if you know the local tow company, AAA. And they run their paperwork. They're very good at it. But when they sold it to us and I went in to title it, there'd been a hold placed on it for a fraud investigation. So I'm able to contact the state, and I have been able to work to get that off. But had that not been able to come off, then we'd be stuck with this vehicle in limbo. In the long run, I've talked to the state before, and they told me, you just have to sell it back. We already have tow fees involved. There's just so many things involved when we get stuck with these vehicles. And we don't process them until we have a title. So our holding area for these vehicles gets overrun and overflowing because I don't want to process them unless I know for sure it's going to clear out in our system. So that does create a whole other problem in terms of storage space, and then just the overall burden of having to go through this. I put on here, like, there was 1 month I took 48 possessory lien affidavits and only got 12 titles. And I had to go back to the tow companies on the other 36 in order for them to try to fix them. And a lot of times we're able to work through them, but sometimes we end up having to sell the car back. They'll have to come pick it up. We have to work out what are we going to do with the towing fees. We're willing to work with our tow companies, and they're willing to work with us. We have a good relationship with them. And a lot of them that we've talked to would prefer to get titles. Because when we work with the tow companies in Kansas City, we'll go to their auction and there will be over 100 cars. Right now, it's hard for them. I've been told by who we've spoken to, it's hard for them to get titles on vehicles because they can only take in so many at a time and they're not dealers. And this bill would alleviate that. And hopefully, what I'm hoping to alleviate is when we bought a stolen 2019 Fiat. In my opinion, if they're going to go to public auction and sell us a vehicle, it should be done legally, and they should legally have possession of that car in order to transfer the ownership to us. So I hope, if you have any questions for me, Steve did a really good job. But I think you guys have kind of covered everything, but just from our perspective, when I heard that this was actually going to be heard, I was almost in tears because this has been, I've had to hire people to come in and help me in the office because of the number of problems that have happened. I've gotten my cousin when he was in law school, if he had any time, come in, just try to help me go through this and how can we fix these, call the tow companies, just anybody that can come help me because it is so much work to get them fixed and to track people down and to just try to get the paperwork done right. So if you have any questions, I'll do my best to answer them.
Are there questions? Did you bring written testimony with you?
I do have one piece.
Okay, if you would make sure you leave that with the committee assistant, I'd appreciate that.
Okay, I will.
Okay. Is there anybody else wish to speak as a proponent? Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Representative Minix.
Mr. Chairman, I'm not going to let her off that easy. I have a really tough question. What's the difference in market value? If you go to an auction and you give a price for a vehicle that you know you're going to get a title, or you go to a tow lot and you get one that's a little bit sketchy and you may not have a title for, when you're actually buying those vehicles, what would the monetary or economic difference be between two similar vehicles?
I would pay more for a title because it's less, for sure you're going to have everything in your hand in order to crush the vehicle out, in order to process it. We also have a used car license. We have a salvage license and a used car license. So some of those vehicles that aren't salvage, we can repair, or some of them are just drivable and we can put them back on the road once we get a title. So with a title, they're worth more monetarily to us because then we legally own them. if
Thank
that
you.
answers your question.
You did very well. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, you did. You got off easy.
Thank you.
Anybody else wish to speak as a proponent? Seeing none, I have one opponent listed, Mr. Tom Whitaker, Executive Director of the Kansas Motor Carriers Association. Welcome to the committee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's a pleasure to be here. I am Tom Whitaker, Executive Director of the Kansas Motor Carriers Association, and I appear here today with Deanne Williams, my replacement as of October. So the Department of Revenue is on the screen, but not in the House. So she's part of us now. Deanne used to work for us many years ago, so we're glad to have her on board, and I'm glad to be able to retire. So we're here today to oppose this legislation. Mainly, it shifts the responsibility of getting a VIN verification and a title from the salvage yard to the tower. And the tower is merely satisfying a lien on a vehicle, just like a mechanic's lien. They've provided a service and have not been paid. As you've heard, when they crush a vehicle, they have to have a title to get to the Department of Revenue so they can do end of life on that VIN. But as I said, I don't know, I've been around too long, let me put it that way. In 1985, the legislature was discussing property valuations and the percentage of valuations that they would do. Classification, they called it. And Brian Whitehead, who was a lobbyist for the Railroad Way and something group, got up and said, moving these percentages around is nothing more than the shift shaft. And this is what this bill does. It merely moves the cost, time, and expense from the salvage dealer to the tower. That's all it does. You know, I often refer to towing companies as the litter control officers of our streets and highways. 99% of the vehicles they sell are either not roadworthy or salvage. And they do it to recover what tow fees they can that were not paid. So with shifting this cost and expense and time to the tower, I sincerely doubt that a purchaser is going to pay more at public auction for a vehicle than they currently do now. There is no provision for a tower to tack on fees to recoup the additional cost in this bill. It just moves the cost and the time. I have attached in my testimony the list of what a tower has to go through to dispose of an abandoned vehicle. I will tell you, the Vice Chairman asked the question, Mr. Chairman, that towers can tow off of public property, not private property, unless there is a specific ordinance or county resolution that provides for towing and recovery off of private property that sets out the limitations. It's called taking. If you take something off of private property, and that's why the two he was talking about that came off campus at KSU and a parking lot over in the Manhattan area could not be processed because they were private property tows. You can do private property tows in Sedgwick and Sumner County because they both have resolutions. But in other counties, including Shawnee County, you cannot. So they are all publicly abandoned vehicles that these folks are towing. The problem you have is not between the salvage dealers and the towers. We made changes last year for any car 15 years or newer. They have to go to another website to determine where a lien holder and owner is throughout the United States. It is not a government-run website. There is no government-run website that towers have access to. So Navitas, they can only tell you the title number of the last title that was produced on a vehicle. We do not have access to the stolen vehicle records. I do have tow companies. One of them's in the vice chairman's district that takes their list before their sale to the local law enforcement to have them run the VIN numbers to make sure nothing is stolen. We have had people that see the publication of their vehicle that it's going to be sold, because under the new law that we passed last year, they have to do it 7 days in advance, report the vehicle stolen when they see the ad. So how is a tow operator going to know that that vehicle was sold or stolen before they tow it? Mr. Chairman, the problem isn't with the towers. It's with the Department of Revenue and what they have to accept. And we do not want to take on the additional expense. We already have enough expense by doing the notifications, paying the website to find out if it's an out-of-state vehicle, where it goes, doing the publication and the legal expenses, and holding a public auction to sell these vehicles and get rid of this junk. And Mr. Chairman, I'd be pleased to respond to any questions.
Other questions? Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This Navitas or Navitas system, who runs that?
Well, it's the National Motor Vehicle Title Information System. I believe AMVA does, don't they? The American Association of Motor Vehicle Administrators.
So it's it's not a government-run system.
Well, AMVA is made up of all the government agencies. So.
Thank you.
Representative Francis.
Thank you, Mr. Whitaker, for your testimony. And I know you picked an able replacement back there with Ms. Williams to fill your shoes.
I'm going to start playing golf Wednesday afternoon.
It's not October yet, buddy. Hey, what percentage of the vehicles that that are on these tow lots wind up being sold rather than the cost of the towings picked up by the owner? Do you have any idea?
If they're sitting on their lot, 100%. Because if I have a car that belongs to me, it's towed, I'm going to go pay it and get it out of there, because I don't want to pay storage and everything else. I'm not going to let them have my car. What these cars are abandoned.
Right. What percentage of the cars that they pick up?
I can't answer that question.
You don't have any idea?
No.
Okay.
You can, if you look in the Topeka paper, Heartland Tow here in Topeka got the contract with the city to haul all of the abandoned vehicles and sell them. That last list I looked at was about 40 cars to run that. That's all they do. They don't do any of the just on the street towing. If your car breaks down, I pick you up. Brown Super Service, for instance, here. Some of those.
Representative Ballard.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good afternoon, Mr. Whitaker. I'm trying to figure out, though, when you say you're in strong opposition to the provisions, the bill moves the process and expense of obtaining the VIN inspection, entitling a vehicle purchased at a towing to recovery possessory. What I'm trying to think, but how does, I understand the opposition, but what about the issue we have been discussing for the last half hour of getting a vehicle and having difficulty in getting the ownership for it? I need a explanation in terms of how does one solve that problem?
Well, the way the lien law is set up is, number one, tow has to be ordered by law enforcement or the owner, unless you're in a private property area. Then if you know who the owner is, you have to give notice. It can be by phone, by anything else, to that owner that you're holding the car subject to payment of the towing and recovery fees and storage within 15 days. Within 30 days, you have to run a VIN verification with the Department of Revenue. That's not free. They charge for it. And then when you, within 10 days of receiving that VIN verification back, you have to, by certified mail, notify the owner and the lien holder that that vehicle is being held for public auction, subject to payment of the tow fees and the storage fees. If they don't come and get it, then you're required to publish that in the newspaper at least 7 days before the auction, when the auction will be held. It's required to be a public auction. And then the person takes all the paperwork, the buyer, goes to the highway patrol and gets a VIN verification on the vehicle. And then they can go to their county treasurer and get title. These people buy in bulk because they're looking for the parts. They don't care too much about the whole car. They want the parts. So the law changes we did last year required that if you get a VIN verification back from the state that says no record, in other words, it was never registered in Kansas, then you have to go to this Auto Dealer Direct website and run that VIN verification. I saw one yesterday that I'm dealing with the highway patrol with that came back that it didn't have an owner on it, but it had the lien holder. And the tower dutifully notified the lien holder out of state that this vehicle was being sold. We didn't do that prior to the passage of the bill last year. So 15 years or newer, they have to do that and then notify that lien holder that it will be sold. If the lien holder doesn't come get it, then they sell it at public auction, but they have that as part of the form for the Department of Revenue is the TR-85. And it has a checklist of everything that needs to be with that form to be processed by a county treasurer to provide title or by the Division of Vehicles. If you're going to ask the towers is VIN verification's $20, used to be 10. And a title fee with the Department of Revenue is 10, but you can't walk into the Department of Revenue right now and get titles anymore. Used to be walk across the street right here and get titles on the first floor. You can go through Don McNeely's company with his title. And if you're a non-dealer, it costs you $25 to get a title. So there's another $45 you've got in this vehicle. It's probably worth $200 or $300. So that's why we don't want it to come to the tower. They aren't going to get paid a decent price for it, and they're going to have to eat more expenses. Does that answer your question?
Yes, it answers my question. But what are those individuals supposed to do in lieu of that?
Well, whether I'm a salvage yard or an individual, if I buy a car off of a towing and recovery lien public auction, I have to get it titled. And they go through enough stuff to clean up the junk off of our streets that you're just adding to their expense and their time and effort to get rid of vehicles.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Anything further? See none. Thank you, Mr. Whitaker.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I show no other opponents. Does anyone else wish to speak as an opponent? I show no neutral. Seeing no neutral, we'll close the hearing on House Bill 2294. Open the hearing on House Bill 2458. Advisor Wagner.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Committee, House Bill 2458 would designate a portion of US Highway 56 in Johnson County as the private first-class Shane Austin Memorial Highway. The highway would begin on the portion of US 56 from the northeastern city limits of Edgerton, then go northeast to the southwestern city limits of Gardner in Johnson County. And highway signs designating the highway as such would not be placed until the requirements of KSA 68-10-114 are met, which, if you'll remember, requires 100% of the sign cost plus 50% of the cost to defray any replacement or future maintenance. I'd stand for any questions.
Are there any questions? Seeing none, thank you. First proponent I have listed is Representative Ken Collins. Welcome to the committee. Absolutely. Thank you. Anyone have any questions? Seeing none, thank you. Now I'd recognize Debbie Austin, mother of PFC Shane Austin. Welcome to the committee. I don't think your mic's on.
I'd like to thank the committee for having me here today to listen to my story, just a small portion of my story. I would also like to thank Representative Ken Collins for bringing this bill. And of course, my friend Pat Proctor. We've been on different events before, so I want to thank everyone. Shane was born December 31st, 1986. He lived life to the fullest. He never turned down a dare. He lived a fear factor personality. He went to boot camp, graduated Mother's Day 2006, left for Kuwait June 12, 2006. October 8, 2006, I get the knock on the door with the words, "We regret to inform you." My life has not been the same. As I said, he lived life to the fullest, a fear factor personality, never turned down a dare. He had a very huge, diverse group of friends from the Gardner Edgerton High School, but by far his best friends were his brothers, Justin and Kyle, and his dad, Terry. Sadly, his dad passed away last June and is not able to be here with us today, but I know that they're looking down on us, smiling. Shane was a little ornery, so he's still hanging out, probably making fun of me at this particular time. It's important for our family to continue his legacy. once, I will always repeat his name and say his name as long as I'm here on earth and until I take my last breath. But once I'm gone, I want to make sure that not only his legacy lives on, but any of our military men and women that have served our country. It's important to teach patriotism and unity to our younger generation. This is where his niece and nephews, my grandkids, come into this. This is something that will live on for our life, for our family forever, and something that my grandkids can be proud of with the Austin, within the Austin family. This is humbling. So I don't know. I just again want to thank you all for listening to me and appreciate the time. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Hoheisel.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't have a question. I just want to say, on behalf of my family, thank you for your son.
Thank you.
And the blessing that he protecting and serving all of us here in this committee room and in this country. And we're really grateful for his service. So thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much.
Any further comments? Representative Ballard?
Thank you very much. You know, from being a mom myself, I would know how extremely difficult it would be for me to stand where you are. But you do it because you're a mom and because you care and you want other people to realize that his service and his dedication needs to be remembered.
When I got the notification, I realized, of course, I was in shock, and I realized there was only a couple of things that I could do. I could get deep in this hole and maybe never come out, or I could live his legacy. And that's what I choose to do. And if any photos you see of Shane, he's doing this. So I have it tattooed, and the Austin family wants to continue to rock Shane's life and bring patriotism to our community. So thank you.
You are more than welcome. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Representative Proctor.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Debbie, for coming today. I don't have a question. I just wanted to highlight, because she won't tell you herself, all the other things that Ms. Austin does to honor our veterans, from being on the committee for Wreaths Across America at the Leavenworth National Cemetery, to being instrumental in the Gold Star Families Memorial, that there's a bill that's bouncing around here in the House from the representative from Manhattan. Just all the things that she continues to do to make sure that not just Shane, but all of the veterans that served our country and fell are honored and remembered. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Making a motion.
Any further comments or questions? Seeing none, thank you so much for being here.
If I can just end by saying, when we stand together, we stay strong. And that is something that I have learned through this journey that I have been put on. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. We appreciate you coming. Thank you. Next proponent I have listed is Janet and Harold Austin, Jr. Guess it will be written testimony then. I have written testimony, I guess, from Justin Austin, who is a brother, and Lisa Blackwell in support of House Bill 2458. There's also a letter of support from Shane Austin's grandmother, Lou Braswell, and we appreciate all that. And committee, you should have a copy of that. Does anyone else wish to speak as a proponent? Seeing none, I have no opponents and no neutrals listed. So I will close the hearing on House Bill 2458. Committee, we will be going more and more to paperless. So please bring your laptop or your iPad as we're going to start going totally paperless. As tomorrow, we'll have hearings on House Bill 2475 and 2476. Does anyone else have anything before we adjourn? Seeing none, committee, we will see you tomorrow at 1:30. Thank you.